Hello everybody. So today we're gonna study about flower, the parts of it and their function. So let's start with what is a flower. Basically, flower is a reproductive part. It is a reproductive organ. It is a reproductive organ of the flower. So as you know that in humans we also have reproductive organs like the ovaries. The ovaries produce eggs, and the testes produce sperms. So these help in the reproduction is very important for life to continue, for the species to not go extinct, for their sustenance. And so it's important to the flower as well. So the flower is basically a reproductive organ. Flowers have the male and female parts, and they help in reproduction. Most flowers have both the male and the female parts of the plant, and that's why they are known as hermaphrodite. But some only have the male parts, and some only have the female parts. So let's start with the structures, with the parts of a flower and their function. So first of all, let's start with sepal. What's sepal? Sepal is this part of the flower. These green leaves, you see. These green leaves you see, these are known as the sepal. What is the function of a sepal? The sepal helps to protect flower in the bud stage. I'm writing. Helps to protect flower in bud stage. We all know that the flower, it comes out of a bud. There's this bud, and after the bud, a flower comes out of it. So basically, when the flower is in the bud stage, the sepal helps to protect the bud. The sepal helps to protect the flower in its bud stage. So that's the only function, but that's not the only function of the sepal. Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes what happens that the sepal is colorful. Sepal is usually green, so it does not attract insects because all the leaves are green, so it's nothing, rare. But, sometimes what happens that the sepal is colorful. Sepal, colorful. So when the sepal is colorful, what happens? It attracts the insects. And attracting insects is very important to a plant, is very important to a flower, is very important in reproduction because it helps in pollination. What does it help in? It helps in pollination. Pollination is very important to a plant because it helps in the spread of the pollen. So what happens? It helps in cross pollination, and it's very important for the plant to be adapted into in its environment. It's very important for the seed, for the plant to be strong and resistant to diseases. So that, we'll study sometimes later the benefits of cross pollination, the benefits of pollination. But right now we have to remember that pollination is important to every flower. It is important to every flower, and hence sometimes the sepal are colorful. Usually they are not. Usually they are just bland green color, and they're the most common function. The function of them is to protect the flower in its bud stage. But sometimes they are colorful and help in pollination. This is very rare, it not happens, very often, but it does happen. The next thing we're going to learn about is the petal. We all know what petals are, these colorful parts of the flower. We all know, we have learned this in 5th grade and whatnot. So what does a petal do? It's colorful. And we just learned that if the sepal is colorful, what does it do? Wait a second. It attracts insects. And then when it attracts insects, what happens? Pollination. So that's why you see that petals are usually colorful in insect pollinated flowers. They're usually colorful to help attract the insects. The insects help in pollination, and it's very important. The petals are also the landing platform of insects. For example, if insects come, so they're gonna land through the flower. So like it's not something very important, but it's just just to remember. These are also the landing platforms of insects. Landing platform for insects. And there are also nectaries present at the base of the petal. Nectaries. And what does this do? The nectaries produce nectar. What does the nectar do? The nectar is sweet. We have seen that the butterflies come near the flower. Why does they come near the flower? They come because they want to drink nectar from the plant. The nectar is a very sweet liquid, and so the insects come to the flower, and when they come to the flower, they help in pollination. So basically, overall, the main function of the leaf petals is to help in pollination by attracting insects. Sorry, the video is very messy and my handwriting is very messy, just bear with it. Alright, so that was about petals. Now let's move on to the male parts of the flower. So as I told you earlier that the flower has male and female parts. Stamen is the male part of a flower. M stands for male part. And the pistil is the female part. The pistil is also known as the carpel. So whatever you want to call it, pistil or carpel, it's up to you. Both are acceptable in Olevel IGCSE. Alright, so this is the male part and this is the female part. So now first of all, let's study the male part. The male part consists of anther and filament. Alright, it consists of anther plus filament. And these, when joined together, in a collective term, anther plus filament is known as stamen. So what is stamen? Stamen is anther plus filament. So what is anther and what is filament and what's their function? Okay, so these thin lines that you are seeing, these are known as the filament. What does the filament do? The filament helps to hold the anther. The anther is very important because the anther produces and releases a male sex cell. For example, in humans, there's this eggs. Those are the female sex cells, and we have sperms. They are the male sex cells. So like that, we have pollen grain. Pollen grain, also known as the male sex cell in a flower. Alright, in a flower. We humans do not have pollen grain, it's in a flower. So in a flower, the anther produces the male sex cells. For example, in humans, the testes produce the male sex cells. Here, the anther produces the male sex cells. And for the sex cells to be produced, it needs to be connected to the flower, right? To get its nutrient and everything like that. So it is connected to the flower and held in this position by the filament. So basically, filament are just these thin wire type things that helps to hold the anther. So let's revise. Stamen is anther, AN for anther, plus filament, FY for filament. The anther produces pollen, and the filament holds the anther. So hope that was clear. That was a very easy thing. And these are the male sex cells. The stamen is the male part of the flower because it produces the male sex cells. Now let's move on to the female part of the flower. The female part of the flower is known as pistil. It's also known as carpel. It has three parts, the stigma. This part is known as the stigma. This thing is known as a style. This stigma. Wait, let me change my color. Style. And this part is known as the ovary. So now let's start from the stigma. So what does the stigma do? So as we know that pollination takes place, so it is the top of the female part. Okay, the whole female part is known as the pistil, and it's the top of the pistil. And what does the stigma do? That it collects the pollen grains. So we learned that this thing the anther produces pollen grains. So the pollen might come from the same flower or from a different flower. So when it comes, basically what happens, for example, if this yellow thing is a pollen, okay, this is a pollen right now. So what happens is the pollen lands over here, lands on the stigma. The stigma collects the pollen. That's what the stigma do. This is, if yellow is not clear, we'll do orange. Okay, so that's what the stigma do, that the stigma collects the pollen. And after collecting, what happens, that the pollen moves from the stigma through the style. So let's take the example. This is the mouth and this is our stomach. So from mouth to stomach, the food has to move through the esophagus. Likewise, from moving, basically where does the pollen has to reach? The pollen has to reach the ovary for the fusion. As just like in humans, the sex cell, the sperm has to reach the eggs, and then fusion takes place. Likewise, the pollen grain has to go to the female sex cell for fusion to take place, the fusion of nuclei, which helps in reproduction. So what happens is the pollen moves from the stigma. There is this stigma, this is the style, and there's this ovary. So what happens, that a pollen lands over here, and then the pollen moves from the stigma through the style to the ovary. That was happened. The ovary is not the sex cell, all right, but the ovary is not sex cell. It produces sex cell. Just like humans, we have ovaries, and ovaries are not sex cells. Many people confuse it. When I was in O-levels, I also confused it. Just to remember that ovary is not the sex cell. It produces the female sex cell. Ovary has ovule in it, and even ovule is not the sex cell. Ovule contains the female sex cell, all right. The ovary is the whole organ. Ovary is an organ which has ovule, which has ova. The ova is the sex cell. Ovule is just in the ovary. Ovary produces the ova, and ovule contains the ova. So basically, the sex cell over here is ova. All right. So I erased by mistake. So stigma, ovary. So what happens? The pollen lands on the stigma. It travels through the style, and it moves to the ovary. Ovary, there is this. For example, this is a big ovary. There is this ovule, and in the ovule, there is this ova. No, not green. there's this ova. So what happens that it moves when it comes, so it fuses with the ova here. So that's what the female part of a flower is for. The production of ovary is the only is all right. So remember that the ova, the female sex cell, cannot move, does not move, just like in humans. But still, in humans, it moves. It gets released. But in the plant, it is fixed in its position. Like it stays in the ovule. It is going nowhere from there, right? So the pollen grain has to come to it. The pollen grain obviously is non-living, so it does not have wings or legs or a tail to swim. So it comes due to the external factors like winds or insects, water. Through these factors, the pollen reaches the stigma. And after this whole thing is known as the pistil, also known as carpel. And this is the stigma, the style, and the ovary. And so, let's go again that the pollen comes over here, travels through. Alright. The pollen comes over here, it travels through the stigma and then goes to the ovary. The ovary produces the female sex cells. Here, the anther produces the male sex cells. And here, the ovary produces the female sex cells. Hope it was clear. The stigma and the style is for pollen to reach the sex cell. Alright, remember it. Alright, so the petal and sepal together are known as the perianth. Like the filament, the anther and filament together are known as the stamen. Ovaries, style, and stigma together are known as pistil or carpel. And likewise, the petal and sepal together are known as the perianth. Alright, so these are the pedicel or the receptacle. These are not as such in your syllabus, but just they are there to hold the flower in its stalk, in its stem, whatever you want to say. So these are just not as important. These are just there for holding and supporting the flower. So that's all. So now there's a quiz. Now you have to label with let's label. Alright, so first we'll wait for a few seconds. So let's start from there. What is the name of this part? What is the name of this part of a flower? And what is its function? We'll go with function and the name side by side. You have to remember the labeling for Olevel and IGCSE. It's important. And also the function. So let's go. Alright. So 1, 2, 3. I'm telling the answer. This is known as petal. It was very easy. We all know what a petal is. What is function? It's colorful. To attract insects. Insects for pollination. So what does the petal do? The petal is colorful to attract the insects for pollination. All right, now let's move on. All right, let me. Oh God. Let me label it petal. All right. What is this? What is this? Excellent. All right. 1, 2, 3. All right. So it's a sepal. If you told the correct answer, very good. And what does the sepal do? The sepal helps to protect the flower in its bud stage. What does the sepal do? The sepal helps to protect the flower in its bud stage. Let's move over here. What is this and what is this? I said it's not important as such, but you still, just remember it, because you never know what the Cambridge gives you. Okay, so this is the receptacle. And this is the pedicel. Okay, now let's move on over here. And the function of these both is just to hold and support the flower. Now let's move over here. What part is this? The red one. What is this? Very good. This is the anther. What is the function of anther? The function of anther is to produce male sex cells, also known as pollen grain. And what is this yellow thing called as? This thing? Excellent. This is known as filament. The filament helps to hold the anther. And together, what are they known as? Together, they are known as stamen. Together, they are known as stamen. It is a male. Oh wait. It is the male part of the flower. So far so good. Now let's move on to this. This is the female part of the flower. What is this known as? The top? Very good. It's known as stigma. You can remember that stigma is the female part of the flower. Just to just remember that women and the female are stigmatized in the society. So just remember that stigma, female. All right, joking only. So this is the stigma. And what does the stigma do? It is a landing platform for the pollen grain. The pollen grain sits over here. This is known as style. Just remember, women got style. So style is the female part of the plant. Alright, style. Style helps to transfer the pollen from the stigma to the ovary. And this is known as the ovary. What does the ovary do? Ovary produces the female sex cells. Ovary has ovules, and ovules has ovum or ova, whatever, the female sex cell. So this is the labeling. Very good. Excellent. The petal, the stigma, style, ovary. Together, this is known as the carpel or the pistil. All right. So that's it for today's. Hoping to see you in the next class. Just if you want to learn anything, or there's a confusion in any topic, do make sure to comment down below, so we'll try to help you out. Thank you guys for watching. Do subscribe, share and like. Bye.